Right, ladies and gents, welcome to the next video. So this is the variables that impact blood sugar. Variables that raise blood sugar first, the main one being carbohydrates, and two main points about that is the glycemic index and glycemic load, and they're the ones that we want to be aware of. So the glycemic index, the higher the number, the quicker a food will impact our blood sugar, and with the glycemic load, the higher the number, the more the total amount that food will impact our blood sugar. Another important thing to think about when we're eating is our meal composition. So for example, if we have more fats in a meal, that tends to slow the effect of blood sugar and make it last longer for a longer period of time. So for example, if we were to have a pizza, it might be, we'll often find that we'll have to do several injections or several boluses of insulin because if we were to inject all of the insulin required to combat all the carbohydrates in the meal to begin with, the speed of the insulin overtakes the speed that the food is absorbed, and we end up with a low blood sugar, which we'll then have to correct, and then the pizza will still be working its way and we'll end up with a high blood sugar later on. That's that basically in a nutshell. And also if we have a smoothie or juice, these tend to impact our blood sugar more quickly because liquids are absorbed more quickly, or tend to be. Another thing that affects absorption rate is something like a digestive issue, so e.g. Delayed gastric emptying, which basically just means that the food stays in our stomach longer than it would normally, and therefore we might have a spike of blood sugar later on, several hours after eating the meal. And another one is a meal size, so if we have a massive meal, then that could take longer to digest as well. So these are things to consider when eating. Protein raises blood sugar, but not quite as much as carbohydrate, and tends to be a bit slower as well. The dawn phenomenon is where our body releases hormones that dump sugar into the blood. So we'll tend to find that our sugar rises either just before waking up, upon waking up, or just after waking up. Stress tends to raise blood sugar for the same reason. Basically, hormones tell the liver to dump sugar into the blood. So things like job interviews, exams, or periods of acute stress or chronic stress can raise blood sugar. Illness or other health issues for the same reason as stress, because when we're ill, our body tends to pump out stress hormones because it recognises that there's something wrong. Exercise tends to raise blood sugar to begin with. It all depends on the type of exercise though. If we're doing something mild like walking, that doesn't tend to raise blood sugar. But anything, at least in my personal experience, anything above the intensity of walking raises blood sugar, even a mild jog. Although later on, the exercise will start to lower blood sugar. So for example, when I'm jogging at a sort of moderate pace, my blood sugar will raise for the first 20-30 minutes, and then it will start to drop off after about 45 to an hour. Dehydration raises blood sugar. Obviously, the more dehydrated, the more the blood sugar is raised. A way of thinking about that is if we were to dissolve sugar in a glass of water, the less water we have, the more concentrated the sugar will be. I find that's an easy way to think about it. Hormonal changes, so for example, if we have to use a glucagon pen, that will raise blood sugar. That tells the liver to dump sugar. It's only really used for emergency uses if we're to find ourselves unconscious from a low blood sugar, for example. Things like puberty, pregnancy, and menstruation will affect blood sugar differently. And of course, other drugs and medications, including things like caffeine, because that tells the body or makes the body release stress hormones, so it's for the same reason as stress, basically. Variables that lower blood sugar, so insulin, that's the big one. Oral diabetes medications, so for example metformin, commonly used for people with type 2 diabetes. Exercise, as I just said, walking tends to be mild enough that it always lowers blood sugar. Anything above that tends to raise blood sugar to begin with, and then lower blood sugar afterwards. And then the more intense the exercise, the more the spike tends to be in blood sugar before it starts to lower. Hydration, because it's the opposite of dehydration. Heat tends to lower blood sugar as well, so if we find ourselves on holiday, for example, if we go to somewhere that's hotter than where we usually reside, then that tends to lower blood sugar. And that tends to combine with other things like for example, when I'm on holiday, if I go somewhere hot, I also tend to do a lot more walking. So there's a few variables combining there. Medication, so for example alcohol, although it depends what we're having the alcohol with. If we're having an alcoholic drink with full fat Coke, for example, that's obviously full of sugar and that will spike blood sugar. But if we have straight alcohol that basically ties up the liver and means that the liver's less able to release sugar into the blood when it's needed. So it's important to be aware of that, because especially during the night after for example, a night out, because our body is less able to combat a low blood sugar because the liver is too busy dealing with the alcohol. So that's something really important to be aware of. And then there's certain herbs and spices as well, things like berberine, cinnamon, which has become a bit of a meme, but it does have some efficacy in reducing blood sugar. Fenugreek, aloe vera, ginger, bilberry extract, and okra, or okra, I don't know how you pronounce that. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Hopefully you find that useful. If you're doing any of the variables that affect blood sugar, either raising them or lowering them, please do pop them in the comment section below. And yeah, hope to see you next one. Cheers.